Welcome. This is Mr. K's presentation on respiration. Real similar to the one I did on photosynthesis, except this time there's no guided notes. You'll be taking notes on this bad boy right in your notebook, so feel free to pause this video at any time that you need to make sure you've got time to write things down. So we're going to jump right in with respiration here. And with respiration, already off to a great start here. With respiration, we're going to kind of backtrack a little bit and talk about what we know about how energy from the sun is used to make food. And if you recall this little diagram here that kind of captures the essence of photosynthesis, we have our sun casting its light down that is captured by the chlorophyll found in the chloroplasts in the plant leaves. At the same time, we have water coming up from the roots of the plant. We've got carbon dioxide entering the leaf through the stomata. And we've got a series of chemical reactions that take place powered by that trapped sunlight energy. And the result of those chemical reactions are the release of oxygen given off into the air and then sugar. So that's a little bit of review. And of course, remember, sugars can be converted into starch for storage. All right. So what happens next? All right, that's great. That's how food is made. But what happens then? Well, organisms, including the plants that make the sugars and starches, need a way to release the energy stored in food. So I'd like you to write this down right in your notes. You probably want to have a heading, respiration, and then you go ahead and copy this right down word for word, this idea that organisms need to release the energy from food. Creating food is a way to store the energy. We need a way to get that energy out. So again, feel free to pause the video at any time if you need a second to write things down. Cells break down simple food molecules and release the energy they contain in a process called respiration. Right? Definitely write this one down. The process is called respiration. And you probably have heard that word respiration before, and in fact, it's likely that you've heard it in the context of breathing. And it's true. Respiration does mean breathing. However, we're talking about something different here. We're talking about cellular respiration. They both require oxygen, but that's about the only thing they have in common. They're two different things. It's the same word, two different meanings. All right, so just don't get them confused. You don't have to write all of this down, but just understand that breathing respiration and cellular respiration are two completely different processes. And just like photosynthesis, respiration is a two-step process. So you might remember photosynthesis had two steps where first the energy was captured from the sunlight for the first step, and then the second step was the series of chemical reactions to convert water and carbon dioxide into glucose and oxygen. Respiration is a two-step process as well. And I'd like you to write these two steps down. Now the first step is called glycolysis. And this is where glucose or sugar is broken down in the cytoplasm of the cell. So whenever you see that lyse word root, like a lysosome, think of splitting or breaking down. So we are breaking down glucose molecules, and this happens in the cytoplasm, right? No specialized organelles needed, right in the cytoplasm. It does not require oxygen, but it also releases very little energy. All right, so this is the first step in respiration. A little bit of energy released, but we're breaking down the sugars, or splitting the sugars. The second step, and just to be confusing, it's called cellular respiration. So the second step of respiration is called cellular respiration. This happens in the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. I'll give you a second to write that down, and again, pause if you need to. This step does require oxygen, so oxygen is needed for this step, but it releases lots of energy. This is where most of the energy is released from this process of respiration in the second step. So here is a diagram. Obviously, it's not to scale because we have this big, ginormous mitochondria right in the cell here. So what happens, we've got glucose entering the cell through diffusion, and in the cytoplasm we have that glycolysis happening where these glucose molecules are being broken down into smaller molecules, and a little bit of energy here is released, not much. At the same time here, we've got oxygen entering the cell and entering the mitochondrion through diffusion. These smaller molecules that are the result of glycolysis enter the mitochondrion, and then there's some reactions that happen in here where we get a lot of energy released. So this is where the bulk of the energy is released. Remember, it uses oxygen. And also there's a couple other products as well. You'll see water being released, and again, that exits through osmosis, and we've got carbon dioxide, which exits the cell through diffusion. So these, we've got energy, is the main reason respiration takes place, and we have water and carbon dioxide as other products. So our reactants, what we start with, raw materials, glucose and oxygen. Our products are the energy that's released, and water and carbon dioxide. Here's the respiration equation. I want you to write this down, but you don't have to memorize this one. So take a second, write that down again. Pause it if you need it. We've got C6H12O6 plus 6O2 yields energy released for the cell to use, plus 6CO2 plus 6H2O. And hopefully this does look somewhat familiar to you. When you look at those components, when you look at those raw materials and those products of that chemical equation, it might bring you back to this. This is the equation for photosynthesis. Here we've got 6CO2 plus 6H2O, and then using energy from sunlight yields C6H12O6, organic matter or sugar or glucose, plus 6O2. So if you look at the raw materials of photosynthesis, I'm going to go back here, those are the products of respiration. And if we look at the raw materials of respiration, the glucose and the oxygen, those are the products of respiration, or of photosynthesis. Easy to get these confused. They're simply, the products and the raw materials are just swapped on either side of that arrow for the difference between the two processes here. So what we have, it's kind of like the ultimate recycling here. We have our light energy hitting the chloroplasts, right? We've got carbon dioxide and water taken in by the plant. A series of chemical reactions take place, and we get organic molecules, that's the sugar or glucose, and oxygen released as the products. So raw materials of photosynthesis, products of photosynthesis. Then we have the sugar or glucose and oxygen undergoing cellular respiration. Energy is released in the form of ATP, and then our other products are carbon dioxide and water. So it is this cycle here, this cycle of matter, where the carbon dioxide and water are converted into glucose and oxygen, which are then used to release the energy, and then we produce carbon dioxide and water all over again. And also some of the energy is given off as heat as well. So it's really pretty neat. And don't forget too, it's not just animals and organisms like you and I that undergo this respiration. The plant cells as well undergo respiration. The whole reason plants undergo photosynthesis is to make food for themselves. We just happen to take it from them when we decide to eat. So this is great, all fine and dandy, but what if there's no oxygen available? Sometimes there will be situations where there is not oxygen available. So if there's no oxygen available, one of two things can happen, and it depends on the type of organism we're talking about. The first thing that can happen is called alcoholic fermentation. Go ahead and jot that one down. And you might recognize that in yeast. where we have glucose. Notice in this equation, and again, don't write this one down. You don't need to know this one. We've got glucose. Notice there's no oxygen here. So this process is different from respiration. And what happens as a result of the process to release some of the energy, we have ethanol, which is alcohol, and CO2 is given off. And of course the energy. Again, it's not as efficient as respiration, doesn't give off as much energy, but when cells need energy, and they're going to do whatever they're able to do to produce it. And you might recognize these products that are a result of alcoholic fermentation. We've got alcoholic beverages, beer and wine. We've got bread. The yeast in bread starts to undergo alcoholic fermentation after it depletes its oxygen. So there's that. Now the other type of fermentation is called lactic acid fermentation. And this is what you and I have happen when we are deprived of oxygen. Now, how can we be deprived of oxygen? We're still able to breathe. Well, if you've ever exercised so much where you actually feel the burn in your muscle, you've actually deprived them of oxygen. So what happens when you're exercising, you're working out, your circulatory system or cardiovascular system is bringing oxygen to all of your cells, but if you're working really hard, it may not be able to keep up. It may not be able to provide enough oxygen for those muscle cells to undergo respiration and get the energy they need. So what happens then is these cells undergo lactic acid fermentation. So that is when you actually feel your muscles start to burn. That lactic acid builds up, and that's what causes you to feel the burn. Right? Again, there's no equation for this that you need to know. You just need to understand that this is what happens when there's not enough oxygen. So that is the presentation on respiration. Feel free to go back and look at any other parts that you think you need to fill in your notes on. And thanks for watching.